The dragon hatchling wouldn't stop following the human janitor. Its mother had already chosen him. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. Ethan Cole had spent the last 3 years cleaning alien spacecraft, scrubbing floors that had seen more star systems than he could count, and emptying waste receptacles for beings whose biology he still didn't fully understand. The Galactic Conservation Institute's orbital station above Draconis Prime wasn't glamorous work, but it paid enough to send credits back to his family on Earth. He never expected that pushing a mop through the Dragon Nursery would change everything. The nursery wing was restricted to most personnel, but janitorial staff had clearance to clean during designated hours. Ethan arrived at 0500 station time, just as the automated systems dimmed the heat lamps to simulate Draconis Prime's dawn cycle. The massive chamber stretched 3 levels high, with reinforced viewing platforms and climate-controlled hatching pods arranged in careful rows. The Draconian dragons were the pride of the Institute, an endangered species rescued from the brink of extinction after their homeworld suffered catastrophic volcanic eruptions 2 centuries ago. Ethan had cleaned this wing dozens of times, always careful to avoid disturbing the precious eggs or the few hatchlings that emerged each season. The adult dragons were kept in separate enclosures, massive creatures with scales that shimmered like molten metal and wings that could blot out suns. The conservation teams treated them with reverent care, documenting every behavior, every mating ritual, every hatching. For Ethan, they were just another exotic species in a galaxy full of them, beautiful but distant. He started his routine in the observation corridor, mopping the floors where scientists tracked mud and spilled nutrition supplements. The work was mindless, rhythmic, giving him time to think about his younger sister's upcoming graduation or whether he'd saved enough credits for his mother's medical treatments. He was halfway through the second corridor when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong in the quiet morning routine. A cracking noise echoed from the primary hatching chamber. Ethan paused, mop in hand. Hatchings were scheduled events, carefully monitored with full scientific teams present. The log had shown no eggs approaching emergence date. He shouldn't investigate. His job was to clean and leave, but curiosity pulled him toward the chamber entrance. Through the transparent aluminum viewing panel, he saw movement in Pod 7. The egg, roughly the size of a hover car, had developed a network of hairline fractures across its obsidian surface. As Ethan watched, a small triangular head punched through the shell, followed by a miniature claw. The hatchling was pale silver, almost white, its scales catching the artificial light like diamonds. The dragon's eyes opened, brilliant amber with vertical pupils that focused immediately on Ethan through the glass. It chirped, a surprisingly bird-like sound, and began struggling out of its shell with determination. Ethan knew he should alert the conservation team, but something held him frozen in place, watching this new life enter the world with nobody but a janitor as witness. The hatchling freed itself completely, about the size of a large dog, with wings that looked too large for its body folded against its flanks. It shook itself, sending fragments of shell scattering across the pod floor, then looked directly at Ethan again. The amber eyes didn't waver. Then it moved. The pod door wasn't fully sealed. The conservation team had probably left it accessible for the automated monitoring systems. The hatchling nudged it with its snout, and the door slid open with a soft hiss. Before Ethan could react, the creature had crossed the chamber floor and pressed itself against the viewing panel, leaving small smudges on the pristine surface he'd just cleaned. It chirped again, louder this time, and began scratching at the glass. Ethan stepped back. This wasn't normal behavior. Hatchlings were supposed to be cautious, staying in their pods until the conservation team could assess their health and begin the careful integration process. This one showed no fear, only intense focus on reaching him. The scratching intensified, and Ethan worried the creature might injure its claws. Against every protocol he'd been taught, Ethan cycled the chamber door open. The hatchling burst through the moment the gap was wide enough, moving with startling speed for something only minutes old. It went straight for Ethan, wrapping its small body around his legs and making a sound somewhere between a purr and a rumble. The scales were warm against his skin, radiating heat like a furnace. Ethan stood perfectly still, unsure what to do with a dragon attached to his leg. The creature looked up at him, chirping expectantly, its tail swishing back and forth with obvious excitement. When Ethan didn't move, it climbed, digging tiny claws into his maintenance uniform and scaling his body like a tree until it reached his shoulder, where it settled with a satisfied sound and nuzzled against his neck. The warmth was almost overwhelming, and Ethan felt the distinct sensation of a forked tongue tasting the air near his ear. He reached up slowly, intending to remove the creature, but the moment his hand made contact with its scales, the hatchling pressed into his palm, and the purring intensified. The texture was smooth, almost frictionless, and impossibly warm. This was bad. This was very bad. Unauthorized contact with conservation specimens was grounds for immediate termination. Ethan tried to pry the dragon loose, but it clung tighter, wrapping its tail around his arm for extra purchase. Every attempt to dislodge it resulted in pathetic chirping sounds that made him feel like he was hurting it. The sound of approaching footsteps made Ethan's heart sink. Dr. Vera Aldrin, the Institute's head of Draconian Conservation, entered the corridor with 2 junior scientists in tow. She was a stern woman from Mars Colony, known for her absolute dedication to the dragons and her zero tolerance for protocol breaches. She stopped short when she saw Ethan with the hatchling on his shoulder. Her expression cycled through surprise, confusion, and then something Ethan couldn't quite identify. Dr. Aldrin said, her voice carefully controlled, "Mr. Cole, would you care to explain why you're in unauthorized contact with a specimen?" Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but the hatchling chose that moment to chirp loudly and spread its wings in what looked like a defensive posture, placing itself between Ethan and the doctor. The tiny creature hissed, a sound that would have been adorable if not for the thin stream of smoke that emerged from its nostrils. The junior scientist stepped back. Dr. Aldrin's eyes widened. She said, her tone shifting to something almost awed. "It's protecting you." Ethan tried to explain. "I was just cleaning, and it hatched, and it came to me. I didn't do anything wrong." Dr. Aldrin held up a hand for silence. She pulled out a scanner and aimed it at the hatchling, which hissed again but didn't move from Ethan's shoulder. The device beeped several times, displaying information on a holographic screen that only the doctor could see clearly. Her expression grew more amazed with each passing second. She said quietly, "Extraordinary." One of the junior scientists asked, "Dr. Aldrin, what is it?" The doctor lowered her scanner. "This hatchling is exhibiting bonding behavior. Dragons bond with their parents, sometimes with siblings, but this creature has bonded with Mr. Cole." Ethan felt the world tilt slightly. Bonded? What does that mean? Dr. Aldrin approached slowly, keeping her movements non-threatening. The hatchling watched her carefully, but didn't hiss again. She said, "Draconian dragons form deep psychological connections with beings they identify as family. It's instinctual, usually reserved for their own species. In 200 years of conservation work, we've never documented a cross-species bond. Until now." The hatchling chirped and nuzzled Ethan's cheek again, leaving a warm spot on his skin. He could feel its heartbeat through its scales, fast and strong. The creature's complete trust in him was both touching and terrifying. Ethan said, "Okay, so you can unbond it, right? Transfer it to a proper handler." Dr. Aldrin's expression turned grave. "Mr. Cole, dragon bonds are permanent. They're not psychological constructs we can simply recondition. The bond forms at a neurochemical level. Breaking it would cause severe trauma to the hatchling, potentially fatal. And there's something else." She gestured to one of the junior scientists, who pulled up a video feed on a portable display. The screen showed a different section of the station, the adult dragon enclosures. In the largest habitat, a massive silver dragon, easily 30 meters from nose to tail, was pressed against the reinforced viewing glass, staring in the direction of the nursery. The creature's scales were the same pale silver as the hatchling, almost white, catching the light with identical diamond brilliance. Dr. Aldrin said, "That's Seraphina, the hatchling's mother. She's been agitated since the egg began hatching. Our monitoring systems show her stress levels are dangerously elevated." Ethan looked at the magnificent creature on the screen. Even through the video feed, her presence was intimidating. Ancient intelligence burned in her eyes as she searched for something beyond the glass. For her child, Ethan realized. For the hatchling currently using him as a perch. He said, "You need to take the hatchling to her. She's worried." Dr. Aldrin shook her head. "We tried. The moment we approached the pod, Serafina became violent. She won't let anyone near. But her agitation started decreasing about 5 minutes ago, right around the time the hatchling reached you. Mr. Cole, I don't think you understand. Serafina chose you." The words didn't make sense. Dragons can't choose humans. We're different species. One of the junior scientists, a young woman with cybernetic eye enhancements, spoke up. Dragons have limited precognitive abilities. It's not well understood, but they can sense intentions, sometimes see probability threads. The mothers are especially gifted. We think they can perceive which beings will keep their offspring safe. Ethan felt the weight of the hatchling on his shoulder, both literal and metaphorical. The creature had fallen into a light doze, radiating contentment and warmth. A mother dragon had somehow looked across space and circumstance and decided that a janitor from Earth was worthy of protecting her child. The absurdity of it almost made him laugh. He said, "This is insane. I clean floors. I don't know anything about raising dragons." Dr. Aldrin's stern expression softened slightly. "Mr. Cole, we have a situation without precedent. Serafina is one of only 12 breeding females of her species in existence. This hatchling represents genetic diversity we desperately need. We cannot risk its well-being by attempting to break a bond that may be crucial to its development. And we cannot ignore that a being of Serafina's intelligence and perception has made a choice we don't fully understand." The implications began settling on Ethan like lead weights. His simple life, his simple job, his plans to return to Earth after earning enough credits. All of it was evaporating in the face of a tiny dragon that had decided he was family. He asked, "What happens now?" Dr. Aldrin considered for a moment, then said, "We consult with Serafina, and you're coming with us." The walk to the adult enclosures felt surreal. The hatchling had woken when they started moving, but instead of seeming frightened, it observed everything with bright curiosity, occasionally chirping at interesting equipment or personnel they passed. Station workers stopped to stare, their expressions ranging from amazement to concern. News traveled fast on a closed orbital station. The adult enclosures occupied an entire section of the station, massive habitats designed to simulate Draconi's Prime's varied environments. Serafina's domain was the largest, a combination of rocky terrain, artificial lava flows, and climate-controlled thermal zones. Through the reinforced observation windows, Ethan could see the true scale of an adult draconian dragon. She was magnificent and terrifying in equal measure. Her silver-white scales seemed to shift in the light, creating patterns that hurt to look at directly. Wings capable of atmospheric flight were folded against her massive frame, each one marked with iridescent patterns that resembled star fields. Her claws could tear through starship hulls, and her eyes held the weight of centuries. Those eyes locked onto Ethan the moment he entered the observation deck. The hatchling chirped loudly and launched itself from Ethan's shoulder, hovering on unsteady wings as it flew toward the glass separating them from Serafina. The adult dragon moved forward, pressing her enormous head against the barrier, and made a sound that resonated in Ethan's chest, a thrumming call that spoke of relief and recognition. Mother and child couldn't touch through the transparent aluminum, but they communicated in ways Ethan didn't understand. The hatchling chirped and clicked, performing a small aerial dance, while Serafina responded with gentle rumbles and precise movements of her massive head. It was beautiful to witness. Then Serafina's gaze shifted back to Ethan. The intelligence in those eyes was unmistakable. This was no simple animal operating on instinct. Serafina was studying him, measuring him, judging whether the choice she'd made was correct. Ethan felt exposed under that scrutiny, as if every secret, every failure, every fear was laid bare before ancient wisdom. He didn't look away. Something told him that would be a mistake. Dr. Aldrin stood beside him, her voice quiet. "She's evaluating you. Dragons communicate partially through what we call resonance. Emotional states, intentions, fundamental character. She's reading you at a level most beings can't perceive." Ethan asked, "What happens if I don't measure up?" The doctor didn't answer immediately. On the other side of the glass, Serafina made a decision. She lowered her massive head in what could only be described as a bow, a gesture of respect and acceptance. The hatchling squealed with joy and returned to Ethan, landing on his shoulder with enough force to make him stagger. Dr. Aldrin released a breath she'd been holding. You passed. Over the next week, Ethan's life transformed completely. His janitorial duties were suspended, replaced with intensive education on dragon care, biology, and behavior. The Institute's entire conservation team became his teachers, sharing decades of accumulated knowledge in compressed sessions that left his head spinning. The hatchling, which Ethan named Spark after its tendency to produce small flames when excited, never left his side. It slept curled on his chest, ate from his hands, and followed him everywhere with devoted attention. The bond between them grew stronger daily, to the point where Ethan could sense the dragon's emotional states and sometimes even vague impressions of its desires. Spark was growing rapidly. Within days, it had doubled in size, requiring Ethan to reinforce his quarters to accommodate a dragon the size of a large wolf. The creature's personality emerged as well, playful and curious, but with a protective streak that manifested whenever Ethan seemed threatened. A maintenance worker who approached too aggressively found himself facing a hissing dragon with smoking nostrils, and learned quickly to give Ethan space. Daily visits to Serafina became routine. The adult dragon would spend hours communicating with her offspring through the glass, teaching it things Ethan couldn't comprehend. He noticed Spark's behavior would shift after these sessions, becoming more controlled, more purposeful. The mother was raising her child even through separation, and Ethan was honored to facilitate it. But not everyone on the station was pleased with the situation. Commander Richard Voss, the station's military liaison, had made his opinions clear from the beginning. Humans had no business interfering with alien conservation efforts, especially not janitors bonding with priceless specimens. He argued for separating Spark from Ethan, transferring the hatchling to Earth's Interspecies Conservation Authority, anything to restore what he saw as proper order. Dr. Aldrin had resisted, citing the bond's importance and Serafina's choice, but political pressure was mounting. The Galactic Conservation Institute answered to a council of member species, and several representatives questioned the wisdom of allowing an untrained human to influence a critically endangered species development. The conflict came to a head 3 weeks after Spark's hatching. Ethan was in the training arena, working with Spark on flight control, when alarms began blaring throughout the station. The automated voice announced a containment breach in the adult enclosures, specifically Serafina's habitat. Emergency protocols engaged, sealing sections of the station and routing all personnel to safe zones. Spark shrieked and took off flying toward the enclosure section before Ethan could stop it. He ran after the dragon, his security clearance allowing him through doors that would have stopped others. The scene he found made his blood freeze. Serafina had breached her enclosure. The reinforced glass lay in massive shards, and the dragon herself had forced her way into the maintenance corridors that ran behind the habitat. She was too large for the space, her bulk wedged between walls that groaned under her weight, but she was moving with desperate determination toward something. Toward the station's docking bay. Ethan understood immediately. His crash course in dragon biology had covered their precognitive abilities, their sensitivity to danger. Serafina sensed something wrong, something approaching, and she was trying to reach the outside to confront it. Spark caught up to its mother, landing on her massive head and chirping frantically. Serafina paused long enough to nuzzle her offspring, then continued her desperate journey. Station security appeared, armed with heavy stun weapons designed to incapacitate dangerous specimens without permanent harm. Commander Voss led them, his voice amplified. "Stand down immediately, or we will be forced to sedate you." Serafina responded with a roar that shook the station's superstructure. Heat washed through the corridor as flames licked from her jaws, a warning that she would not be stopped. The security team raised their weapons. Ethan ran forward, placing himself between the guns and the dragon. He shouted, "Don't shoot. She's trying to protect us." Commander Voss's face reddened with anger. "Mr. Cole, step aside. This creature is out of control." Dr. Aldrin arrived, breathing hard from running. "Commander, wait." If Ethan's right, if Seraphina senses danger, we need to listen. The commander's response was cut off by another alarm. This one was different, the high-pitched wail of an external threat detection. The station's defense systems had identified an approaching vessel, one that wasn't broadcasting proper identification codes. All eyes turned to the nearest display screen, which showed a ship decloaking near the station's perimeter. It was a poacher vessel, heavily armed and marked with the symbols of the Void Reavers, a criminal organization known for trafficking in endangered species. They had come for the dragons, and they'd chosen their moment during a shift change when the station's defenses were recalibrating. Seraphina had known. She'd sensed their approach before any technology could detect them, and she'd been trying to position herself to defend her species, her offspring, her chosen protector. The station shuddered as the poacher ship opened fire, targeting the docking bay doors with precision strikes meant to breach the hull and create chaos. Emergency shields engaged, but everyone knew they wouldn't hold long against sustained assault. The Void Reavers were equipped with military-grade weapons, far beyond what a conservation station's defenses could handle. Commander Voss made a decision, lowering his weapon, all security personnel to defensive positions. Protect the specimens and prepare for boarding actions. He looked at Seraphina, then at Ethan, and something in his expression changed. He said, "If that dragon can help, let it." Dr. Aldrin began. "Commander, the risk to Seraphina is too great." Seraphina made the choice for them. She forced her way through the final corridor, emerging into the docking bay just as the poachers breached the outer doors. Void-suited raiders poured through the gap, carrying energy nets and tranquilizer weapons designed to capture specimens alive and valuable. They didn't expect a fully grown draconian dragon waiting for them. Seraphina's roar was apocalyptic. She unleashed flames that turned the docking bay into an inferno, melting poacher equipment and sending raiders scrambling for cover. Her tail swept through their ranks like a battering ram, and her claws shredded their armor as if it were paper. She was a force of nature contained in scales and fury, and the poachers discovered too late that they'd brought inadequate tools for this particular hunt. Spark launched from its mother's head, targeting raiders that tried to flank Seraphina. The hatchling might have been small, but it was fast and clever, using its size advantage to dart through the chaos and disable weapons with precisely aimed flame bursts. Ethan watched his bonded dragon fight, with a combination of pride and terror. The station's security forces joined the battle, but it was clear the dragons were the decisive factor. Seraphina held the central bay, preventing the raiders from accessing the corridors that led to the other specimens. Every attempt to advance met with crushing force or incinerating fire. The poachers had expected an easy target, a conservation station with minimal defenses and priceless cargo. They hadn't accounted for a mother protecting her family. The poacher ship attempted to provide support fire, but the station's defense platforms had come online, engaging it in a firefight that filled the space around the orbital with energy blasts and missile trails. The battle was turning against the Void Reavers, and their commander made the call to retreat. The raiders, still capable of moving, fled back to their ship, abandoning equipment and wounded in their haste. The poacher vessel disengaged, its hull scorched and smoking, and jumped to faster-than-light speed before the station's platforms could deliver a killing blow. The docking bay fell silent except for the crackling of cooling metal and the heavy breathing of exhausted defenders. Seraphina stood amid the wreckage, her silver scales blackened in places, but her eyes still burning with protective fury. Spark returned to her, chirping with concern, and the mother dragon gently checked her offspring for injuries with careful movements of her massive head. Finding none, she turned her attention to Ethan. He approached slowly, aware that he was facing a being that had just demonstrated the capacity for devastating violence. But when Seraphina lowered her head to his level, all he saw was gratitude and recognition. He reached out, placing his hand on her scaled snout, and felt the same warmth he experienced with Spark, magnified 100 times. In that moment, Ethan understood. The bond didn't run only between him and Spark. Seraphina had claimed him as well, as part of her family, worthy of her protection and her trust. The mother dragon had chosen him not just as her offspring's companion, but as someone who would stand with them when danger came. She'd seen something in a janitor from Earth that even he hadn't known was there. Commander Voss approached, his earlier hostility replaced with something resembling respect. He said, "Mr. Cole, I owe you an apology." And her. He gestured to Serafina, who watched him with ancient eyes that seemed to weigh his sincerity. The dragon made a low sound, not quite acceptance but no longer threatening, and carefully made her way back toward her enclosure. The maintenance crews would have their work cut out for them repairing the damage, but she moved with purpose, trusting that the humans around her would do what needed to be done. Sparks settled on Ethan's shoulder, exhausted from the battle but radiating contentment. The hatchling had fought alongside its mother, protected its bonded human, and proven itself despite its young age. Ethan could feel pride flowing through their connection, not his own, but Sparks' satisfaction at having done well. Dr. Aldrin joined them, her clothes disheveled but her expression triumphant. She said, "I need to file approximately 700 incident reports, but I wanted to say something first. What happened today was extraordinary. You've changed everything we thought we knew about dragon social structures and bonding capacity. The academic papers alone will take years to process." Ethan managed a tired smile. "I just didn't want anyone to get hurt, including her." The doctor's expression softened. "That's exactly why she chose you, Mr. Cole. Dragons don't bond based on strength or knowledge. They bond based on character, on the fundamental nature of a being's spirit." Serafina saw someone who would put others first, who would stand in defense of the vulnerable even at personal cost. She saw what you were, not what you appeared to be. The words settled over Ethan as he looked around the damaged docking bay. His life had been simple once, defined by routine and humble work. Now he stood at the center of something larger, bonded to an endangered species, recognized by an ancient intelligence, forever changed by a hatchling that wouldn't stop following him. Over the following months, the station adapted to its new reality. Ethan's role evolved from janitor to something the Institute created specifically for him, bonded guardian. He worked closely with Dr. Aldrin and her team, learning advanced dragon care while maintaining his unique relationship with Spark and Serafina. The hatchling grew rapidly, soon requiring larger accommodations and more complex training. The bond between them deepened in ways that surprised everyone. Ethan discovered he could sense Spark's location anywhere on the station, feel echoes of the dragon's emotions, and sometimes even share vague impressions of what Spark perceived. The dragon, in turn, became increasingly attuned to Ethan's needs, learning to interpret human expressions and responding to verbal commands with remarkable intelligence. Serafina's presence remained a constant in their lives. The mother dragon had been given a redesigned enclosure with viewing areas where she could watch Spark's development. The two dragons communicated regularly, and Ethan often found himself included in their exchanges, receiving impressions of approval or gentle correction when Spark's training took wrong turns. It felt like being adopted into a family whose language he only partially understood, but whose acceptance was absolute. The Galactic Conservation Institute's council eventually ruled on Ethan's status. After heated debate and expert testimony, they acknowledged the bond's legitimacy and granted him full clearance as Spark's primary caretaker. The decision came with conditions, regular evaluations, strict protocols, and the understanding that Spark's well-being took priority above all else. But it also came with recognition that sometimes the universe presented situations beyond established procedures, and wisdom meant adapting rather than enforcing rigid rules. News of the bonded human spread throughout the galaxy. Other conservation programs reached out, curious about the implications for cross-species interaction. Scientists proposed studies. Media outlets requested interviews. Ethan declined most of it, preferring to focus on the daily reality of raising a dragon rather than becoming a celebrity. But he did agree to one request. A documentary team from Earth wanted to record Spark's development, showing humanity what one of their own had achieved among the stars. Ethan saw it as an opportunity to inspire others, to show that extraordinary things could happen to ordinary people, that the universe was stranger and more wonderful than anyone imagined. The filming took place over several weeks, capturing Spark's training sessions, Ethan's interactions with Serafina, and interviews with the conservation team. The documentary's director, A woman named Alexis Miles seemed particularly interested in the moment of first contact, when a newly hatched dragon had chosen a janitor over trained specialists. She asked during one interview, "What went through your mind when Spark first climbed onto your shoulder?" Ethan considered the question, stroking Spark's scales as the dragon dozed beside him, now the size of a small horse. Honestly, panic. I thought I'd broken every rule and was about to lose my job. I didn't understand what was happening, why this beautiful creature wanted anything to do with me. I still don't, not completely, but I've learned to trust it, to trust her. He meant Seraphina, whose wisdom had seen something in him worth nurturing. The mother dragon appeared on a monitor feed, watching from her enclosure, her presence a constant reminder of the responsibility Ethan carried. Alexis asked, "Do you ever regret it? Your life was simpler before." Ethan looked at Spark, at the dragon who had fundamentally altered his existence. Simple seemed like a small thing to trade for this, for belonging to something ancient and profound, for being chosen by a species that predated human spaceflight by millennia. His plans for Earth, for a quiet life helping his family, those hadn't disappeared. They'd transformed into something larger, a purpose that served both his human connections and his dragon family. He said, "No regrets, just gratitude." Spark stirred, opening one amber eye to look at him, and Ethan felt the warm pulse of affection through their bond. The dragon understood, in its way, what he'd given up and what he'd gained. They were bound together, human and dragon, across every difference that should have kept them apart. The documentary aired 6 months later, broadcast across human space and beyond. Ethan watched it in his quarters, which had been expanded to accommodate a still-growing Spark. The dragon had reached adolescence, large enough to fly freely in the station's exercise areas, but not yet full-grown. Seraphina estimated it would take another 2 years before Spark reached adult size, and even then, the bond would continue shaping both of their lives. The response to the documentary was overwhelming. Messages flooded in from across Earth and its colonies, from people inspired by the story, from children who now dreamed of working with alien species, from families who saw hope in the idea that their relatives serving in distant stations might find similar purpose. Ethan tried to answer what he could, but eventually had to rely on automated responses for most of it. One message stood out, though. It came from his mother, her face appearing on his personal screen with tears in her eyes and a smile that spoke of pride beyond words. She said, "I always knew you were special, Ethan. I just didn't know the universe would notice too. Your sister graduates next month, and she's decided to study xenobiology. She says she wants to understand what you're experiencing, maybe find her own connection out there among the stars. You've changed our family, sweetheart. You've given us something to reach for." Ethan watched the message 3 times, feeling the weight of influence he'd never sought. His simple act of being himself, of responding with compassion to a hatchling's need, had created ripples extending far beyond this station. He wondered what his younger self, the one who just wanted to earn credits and return home, would think of this version wearing responsibility like scales. Spark nuzzled against him, sensing his emotional state through their bond, and made the low, comforting sound that meant everything was well, everything was as it should be. The dragon had grown into a magnificent creature, silver-white scales gleaming with the same otherworldly beauty as its mother, eyes that held growing intelligence and unwavering devotion. Their bond had become as natural as breathing, an essential part of who Ethan was now. The station's routine had normalized around them. Spark participated in conservation breeding assessments, its genetic profile valuable for the species' long-term survival. Ethan worked with newly hired staff, teaching them about dragon behavior and the importance of respect over dominance in interspecies relations. Dr. Aldrin had promoted him to assistant director of the Draconian program, a position that would have seemed absurd a year ago, but now felt earned through experience and dedication. Seraphina had laid another egg 3 months prior, fertilized before her capture decades ago, but held in biological stasis until conditions were optimal. The conservation team monitored it carefully, wondering if the mother dragon would make another unexpected choice when it hatched. Ethan hoped not, for some other person's sake. Being chosen was transformative, but also demanding in ways that never fully became comfortable. But he'd be there to help if it happened, to guide whoever found themselves suddenly bonded to a dragon, suddenly responsible for nurturing an endangered species offspring. He understood now that Seraphina's choice hadn't just been about him and Spark. It had been about creating a bridge, demonstrating that the gaps between species could be crossed with trust and respect, that family could form in unexpected ways. A year and a half after Spark's hatching, the Galactic Conservation Institute held a ceremony honoring the station's defenders from the poacher attack. Commander Voss received a commendation for his tactical leadership. Dr. Aldrin was recognized for her decades of dedication to dragon conservation. And Ethan, along with Spark and Seraphina, received the Council's highest civilian honor for their role in protecting the specimens and repelling the Void Reavers. The ceremony took place in the station's main amphitheater, with representatives from dozens of species in attendance. Spark, now large enough to be impressive but still young enough to be manageable, stood beside Ethan on the stage. Seraphina watched from a specially prepared enclosure that allowed her to be present without the security risks of a loose adult dragon in a crowded space. The council's speaker, a being from a crystalline species whose name Ethan still couldn't pronounce correctly, addressed the assembly. We honor today those who demonstrated that protection of life transcends species, that courage manifests in unexpected forms, and that the bonds between beings can redefine what we believe possible. The human Ethan Cole and the dragon Spark and Seraphina have shown us that our categories and expectations sometimes limit our understanding of the universe's true nature. Ethan accepted the medal they placed around his neck, a heavy piece of crafted metal from a dozen worlds, representing the Council's unity and appreciation. Spark received a specially designed version that hung from a collar around the dragon's neck, much to its obvious pleasure. And Seraphina, watching from her enclosure, received recognition that was projected into her space, a holographic display of the Council's gratitude that the ancient dragon observed with what Ethan had learned to recognize as satisfaction. After the ceremony, as delegates mingled and offered congratulations, a young Terran woman approached Ethan. She wore the uniform of Earth's Interspecies Conservation Authority, and her name tag identified her as Haley Barrett, junior xenobiologist. She looked nervous, clutching a datapad like a lifeline. She said, "Mr. Cole, I wanted to thank you. I saw your documentary, and it changed my career path. I was studying theoretical xenobiology, all analysis and no field work, but watching you with Spark made me realize I needed to be out here, actually working with the species I studied. I requested assignment to this station, and they accepted me last month." Ethan smiled. "Welcome aboard. Dr. Aldrin runs a tight program, but you'll learn more here than anywhere else in the galaxy." Haley hesitated, then asked, "Can I ask you something? In the documentary, you talked about trusting the bond even when you didn't understand it. How did you know it was real? How did you know you weren't just convincing yourself of something impossible?" It was a good question, one that cut to the heart of his experience. Ethan looked at Spark, who was being admired by a group of delegates brave enough to approach the young dragon. He felt their bond like a warm current in his chest, constant and undeniable. He said, "I didn't know, not at first. But every day, the bond proved itself through 1,000 small moments. Spark understanding what I needed before I spoke it. Me sensing when the dragon was uncomfortable or scared. The way we moved together like we'd choreographed it, even though we'd never practiced. Trust isn't about certainty. It's about being willing to believe in something despite uncertainty. And eventually, the evidence accumulates until doubt becomes impossible." Haley nodded, absorbing his words. "I hope I get a chance to experience something like that." Ethan thought about Seraphina's second egg, about the possibility that lightning might strike twice in this unusual place. He said, "Maybe you will. The universe has a way of surprising us when we're open to it." The young scientist thanked him and moved on, and Ethan watched her go, seeing himself in her eager nervousness. He'd been that uncertain person once, before a hatchling decided he was worth following, before a mother dragon chose him as worthy of trust. Spark returned to his side, having tired of delegate attention, and pressed against his leg with familiar affection. The dragon had grown so much, but some behaviors remained constant from its first minutes of life. The need for contact, for reassurance, for connection. Ethan rested his hand on Spark's head, feeling the warmth and strength there, feeling the pulse of their bond like a second heartbeat. 2 years after Spark's hatching, Seraphina's second egg began showing signs of emergence. The conservation team prepared carefully, having learned from the first unexpected bonding. They didn't try to control the situation, instead allowing the process to unfold naturally while maintaining careful observation. Ethan was present, as was Spark, now nearly adult-sized and magnificent in the full glory of its matured scales. The younger dragon had expressed interest in the egg for weeks, recognizing it as a sibling, and Seraphina had permitted the attention with patient supervision. When the egg began cracking, the entire station seemed to hold its breath. The hatchling that emerged was gold bronze, smaller than Spark had been, with eyes like molten copper. It stumbled from its shell, chirping with the same vulnerability that all newborn creatures possessed, and looked around the chamber with confused curiosity. Then it saw the assembled observers and made its choice. The hatchling walked straight to Haley Barrett, the young xenobiologist who'd requested station assignment after watching Ethan's documentary. It climbed her legs with determination, settled on her shoulder, and chirped with obvious satisfaction. The young woman stood frozen, tears streaming down her face, as a dragon claimed her as family. Seraphina watched from her enclosure, her ancient eyes containing what Ethan swore was amusement. The mother dragon had done it again, had looked into a human heart and found it worthy. Haley met Ethan's gaze across the chamber, terror and joy warring in her expression, and he nodded with understanding and encouragement. Welcome to the family, he thought, knowing the bond had just transformed another life forever. Dr. Aldrin approached him as the conservation team began processing this second unprecedented bonding. She said quietly, "She's creating a legacy. Seraphina is building bridges between species through her offspring, choosing humans she believes will protect and honor her children. I think she sees something in humanity that we don't see in ourselves." Ethan watched Spark move to Haley's side, the older dragon already taking on a protective role toward its sibling and the newly bonded human. He thought about what Seraphina might perceive, what quality in humans called to an ancient species' maternal instinct. Perhaps it was adaptability, or emotional capacity, or simply the willingness to love something utterly different from themselves. He said, "Whatever she sees, I hope we prove worthy of it." The doctor smiled. "You already have, Mr. Cole. Every day, you prove it." 3 years after that first unexpected hatching, Ethan stood in the observation deck overlooking the expanded dragon enclosures. The conservation program had grown, supported by increased funding and galactic interest in the cross-species bonding phenomenon. 4 more dragons had hatched, 3 choosing human guardians and 1 bonding with a member of the crystalline species that made up the council's leadership. Spark soared through the flight chamber, fully adult now and breathtaking in motion. The dragon had become a teacher of sorts, working with younger hatchlings and demonstrating behaviors that helped them integrate into the conservation program. Their bond had matured as well, requiring less constant contact, but remaining deeply present in Ethan's awareness. He could be anywhere on the station and know exactly where Spark was, how the dragon felt, what occupied its magnificent mind. Seraphina had laid 2 more eggs, both still developing in carefully monitored stasis. The mother dragon had become matriarch of the entire program, her wisdom and unexpected choices guiding the conservation effort in directions no one had anticipated. She'd created a new model for endangered species protection, one built on partnership rather than mere preservation. Ethan's family had visited twice, his mother and sister making the long journey from Earth to see what his life had become. His sister had been accepted into the Institute's training program, working toward her own role in xenobiology. His mother had stood before Seraphina's enclosure and wept, overwhelmed by the reality of what her son had achieved, what he'd become. Not a janitor anymore, though Ethan sometimes missed the simplicity of those early days. Now he was director of the Bonded Guardian program, training others who found themselves chosen by dragons, writing protocols that balanced dragon needs with human safety, and serving as the primary example of how successfully these impossible bonds could thrive. But more than any title, he was Spark's bonded human. That core truth defined him more than any professional achievement. When he was with the dragon, flying in zero-gravity chambers, or simply resting in shared quarters, Ethan felt complete in ways he'd never experienced before. The bond had become part of his identity, inseparable from who he was. A message notification interrupted his thoughts. Commander Voss, who'd become an unexpected ally and friend, requested his presence in the command center. Ethan sent acknowledgement and headed that way, feeling Spark's attention shift toward him across the station. The dragon would find him if needed, their connection making them perpetually aware of each other. The command center was busy with routine operations when Ethan arrived. Voss stood at the central display, reviewing what looked like deep space telemetry data. He gestured for Ethan to join him. The commander said, "We've detected something unusual." Long-range sensors picked up what might be a ship in distress about 4 light-years from here. The signature is consistent with Draconian technology, but that's impossible. The species was pre-space flight when we found them. Ethan studied the data, his years of dragon education making him more familiar with their homeworld's history than most humans. He said, "Pre-space flight when we found them 200 years ago, but their civilization is ancient. Who knows what they achieved before the volcanic catastrophes?" Voss nodded slowly. "That's what Dr. Aldrin said. She wants to mount a rescue mission, but it's politically complicated. The region where we detected the signature is claimed by 3 different species, none of whom are particularly friendly with the Galactic Conservation Institute." Ethan understood the implications immediately. A potential discovery of lost Draconian technology or survivors could reshape everything they knew about the species. It could also provide crucial genetic diversity for the conservation effort. But reaching it would require navigating dangerous political waters and possibly hostile territory. He asked, "What does Serafina think?" The question would have seemed absurd years ago, consulting a dragon on strategic decisions. But Serafina had proven her wisdom and perception repeatedly. Her insights, filtered through the conservation team's interpretations, had prevented disasters and guided successes. Voss pulled up another display, showing Serafina in her enclosure. The mother dragon was agitated, moving restlessly and making sounds that the translation algorithms struggled to process. She'd been this way since the signal was detected, her precognitive abilities possibly sensing something about the situation. Dr. Aldrin's voice came through the communication system. "She knows it's important. I think she wants us to investigate, but she's also sensing danger. The impressions we're getting are contradictory." Ethan made a decision that would have seemed impossible for a former janitor. "I'll talk to her. Spark and I will see if we can clarify what she's perceiving." 20 minutes later, Ethan stood in Serafina's enclosure, the first time he'd been in the same space with the adult dragon without barriers since the poacher attack. Spark accompanied him, the younger dragon serving as both translator and comfort. Serafina regarded them with eyes that held galaxies, and Ethan felt the weight of her attention like a physical force. He said aloud, knowing his words were inadequate but trusting the bond to convey meaning beyond language, "We need your guidance. Something out there calls to us, maybe your people, maybe your past. But the path is dangerous. Should we go?" Serafina lowered her massive head until her eyes were level with Ethan's. The moment stretched, filled with something that transcended normal communication. Through Spark, through the bonds they all shared, Ethan felt impressions flowing from the ancient dragon. Not words, but concepts, emotions, certainties. Danger, yes, but also necessity. Something waiting that mattered more than safety. A missing piece of a puzzle that had tormented Serafina for 2 centuries. The signal wasn't just a distress beacon. It was a call home, an echo of what her species had lost, and she needed humans to answer it, because her people couldn't. Ethan understood, though explaining it to others would be nearly impossible. He said, "We'll go? We'll find what's waiting there and bring it back safely." Serafina's rumble shook the enclosure, but it was approval, not threat. She touched her snout to Ethan's chest gently, a gesture of trust and gratitude, then did the same to Spark. The younger dragon chirped with determination, already committed to whatever mission was unfolding. As Ethan left the enclosure, he knew his life had shifted again. From janitor to guardian to what? Explorer? Ambassador? Whatever role the universe required to serve the family that had claimed him, he would fulfill it. Because that's what you did for family, dragon, or human. You answered when they needed you, regardless of danger or impossibility. The mission launched 2 weeks later. A specially equipped vessel, the Seraphina's Hope, carried a team that included Ethan, Spark, Dr. Aldrin, Commander Voss, Haley Barrett and her bonded dragon named Ember, and a crew of specialists. They were venturing into unclaimed space, following a signal that might reveal nothing or might change everything. Spark occupied a specially designed chamber in the ship, large enough for flight practice and comfortable rest. The dragon had never been in space beyond the station's orbit, and Ethan worried about how the journey would affect their bond. But Spark seemed excited, pressing against the viewing ports and watching stars slide past with fascinated attention. The journey took 6 days, the ship pushing its faster-than-light drives to their safe limits. During that time, Ethan felt Seraphina's presence in his thoughts, filtered through his bond with Spark. The mother dragon was reaching across the distance, maintaining connection with her offspring and by extension with him. It was disorienting but also comforting, knowing they weren't truly alone even light years from the station. When they dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the coordinates, the view that greeted them defied expectations. A ship floated in the void, but not a wreck as they'd anticipated. It was ancient but intact, its design organic and flowing, resembling a dragon in flight. The hull gleamed with the same metallic sheen as draconian scales, and energy readings suggested active systems despite 2 centuries of drift. Dr. Aldrin's voice was hushed with awe. It's a colony ship. The design matches theoretical reconstructions of pre-catastrophe draconian civilization. They must have launched it before the volcanic eruptions destroyed their spacefaring capacity. Commander Voss ran tactical scans. I'm reading life signs. Faint, but definitely present. Something's alive on that ship. The team prepared for boarding with careful protocol. Ethan and Spark would go first, their bond with Seraphina possibly granting them safe passage if any dragons had survived. Haley and Ember would follow, then the rest of the team once initial contact was established. The airlock cycled, and Ethan stepped into a ship that had sailed between stars for 200 years. The interior was dark, emergency lighting providing bare illumination. But as Spark entered behind him, the dragon's scales began to glow, responding to something in the ship's systems. Lights activated along the corridors, recognizing draconian presence and welcoming them home. They moved deeper into the vessel, following the life sign readings. The ship's design was beautiful, every surface decorated with patterns that told stories Ethan couldn't read. It felt sacred somehow, a tomb and a treasure merged into one artifact. The life signs led them to a central chamber that must have been a hibernation bay. Hundreds of pods lined the walls, most dark and silent. But 3 showed active status, their occupants sustained by systems that had somehow endured centuries. Ethan approached the nearest pod, and the transparent cover revealed an adult dragon in stasis, smaller than Seraphina, but undeniably alive. Spark made a sound Ethan had never heard before, a call that resonated through the ship's structure. The stasis pods responded, their systems beginning revival sequences that had been waiting for this moment. The 3 dragons were waking up, summoned by one of their own kind after 200 years of dreamless sleep. Dr. Aldrin's voice crackled through the communication system. Ethan, what's happening? The ship's power levels are spiking. Ethan watched the first dragon emerge from its pod, eyes opening to reveal consciousness that had slept through centuries. He said, "They're waking up." Spark called them back. The 3 dragons were disoriented but aware, looking at Spark and then at Ethan with expressions that cycled through confusion, hope, and desperate need for information. One of them, scales the color of burnished copper, approached Ethan directly and did something that stopped his heart. It bowed, just as Seraphina had done years ago, recognizing him as someone worthy of trust. The other 2 followed suit, and Ethan realized he was experiencing the same choice Seraphina had made, multiplied. These ancient dragons, survivors of their species near extinction, were claiming him as family just as Spark had done. Through his bond, Ethan felt Seraphina's presence surge. She knew. Across light years, she sensed what was happening and filled him with encouragement and approval. Her choice had been validated, her trust in humans confirmed by her people's own recognition. The bonds between their species were real, meant to be, acknowledged by dragons who'd never met humans before. Ethan bowed back, accepting responsibility he barely comprehended. He said, his voice rough with emotion, "Welcome home. We've been waiting for you." The return journey was slower, accommodating the 3 adult dragons who'd never experienced human spaceflight. They were weak from stasis, requiring careful nutrition and gentle reintroduction to activity. But they were alive, 3 more breeding adults that could transform the conservation program's chances of success. Ethan spent hours with them, facilitated by Spark's translation and the bonds forming between them. They had names in their own language that human vocal cords couldn't reproduce, so they chose human names together. The copper-scaled dragon became Phoenix for its resurrection from near death. The silver one, slightly larger than Phoenix, became Storm. And the third, whose scales held hints of purple in their black depths, became Shadow. They told their story in fragments, memories preserved through stasis but jumbled by time. Their colony ship had launched just before the catastrophes, carrying the last hope of draconian spacefaring civilization. The plan had been to find a new world, establish a colony, then return to save others. But something had damaged their navigation systems, leaving them adrift, and the crew had entered stasis hoping to be found. 200 years they'd waited, their ship's systems degrading but never quite failing. And then Spark's call had reached them, young dragon voice echoing through the void, summoning them back to consciousness and hope. Phoenix, who seemed to be the leader, communicated a question through Spark that Ethan felt as much as heard. Why had humans cared enough to search for them? Why risk this journey for strangers? Ethan thought about how to answer, how to explain bonds that transcended species and logic. He said, because Seraphina chose to trust us. Because her offspring claimed us as family. Because once you're connected to someone, their people become your people. You're not strangers. You're family we hadn't met yet. The 3 dragons made sounds that Spark translated as understanding mixed with amazement. They'd left a world where their species was alone, superior, unchallenged. They'd awakened to find themselves part of something larger, connected to beings who looked nothing like them, but offered belonging nonetheless. When the Seraphina's Hope docked at the conservation station 3 weeks after departing, a crowd had gathered to witness the return. News of the discovery had spread throughout the galaxy, and representatives from dozens of species wanted to observe this moment of resurrection for an endangered civilization. But the real reunion happened in the expanded dragon enclosure, where Seraphina waited for the 3 survivors. Ethan released Phoenix, Storm, and Shadow into the space, and watched as ancient dragons who'd never met recognized each other as kin. Seraphina's call resonated through the station, a sound of such joy and relief that even beings without bonds could feel it. The 4 adult dragons came together, touching snouts and wings, communicating in ways that made the air shimmer with their combined presence. Spark joined them. The young dragon welcomed into their circle, and Ethan felt through their bond what it meant to his dragon to be part of this moment. Dr. Aldrin stood beside him, tears streaming down her face. She said, "We did it. We actually did it. The species has a real chance now. Genetic diversity we thought lost forever." Ethan nodded, watching his family, both born and chosen, celebrate reunion across time and space. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, from a janitor pushing a mop to a man standing at the center of an interspecies miracle. It was absurd and perfect and more than he'd ever imagined possible. The 3 rescued dragons had already begun forming bonds with humans, their time with Ethan on the journey creating foundations for deeper connections. Phoenix gravitated toward Dr. Aldrin, recognizing in her the same dedication Seraphina had valued. Storm connected with Commander Voss, drawn to his protective nature and strategic mind. Shadow, the quietest of the 3, had chosen a young maintenance engineer named Lucas Barrett, who'd been working on expanding the dragon enclosures and showed patient care in every action. The conservation program transformed overnight. With 7 adult dragons, including Seraphina, and multiple bonded guardians, they could begin true population recovery. The rescued colony ship was being studied, its technology offering insights into draconian history and capabilities. And the bonds between humans and dragons were becoming accepted across the galaxy, recognized as genuine partnerships rather than anomalies. 5 years after Spark's hatching, Ethan stood in a very different place than where he'd begun. The Galactic Conservation Institute had promoted him to Director of Interspecies Bonding Programs, overseeing initiatives that extended beyond dragons to other species, showing capacity for cross-species connections. His work was referenced in academic papers, taught in xenobiology courses, and used as a model for conservation efforts throughout known space. But titles and recognition mattered less than what he felt through his bond with Spark every moment of every day. The dragon was fully mature now, magnificent and powerful, capable of atmospheric flight and demonstration of abilities that still amazed observers. They worked together, teaching new guardians, showing how bonds could flourish with respect and dedication. Seraphina had laid 4 more eggs, each one carefully monitored as it developed. The mother dragon had continued her pattern of choosing human guardians, her trust in the species apparently unlimited. Phoenix, Storm, and Shadow had produced eggs as well, their genetic material precious beyond measure. The conservation station had expanded to 3 times its original size, becoming a hub for interspecies relations and endangered species protection. Ships arrived daily bringing scientists, diplomats, and beings curious about the bonds forming there. And through it all, the dragons remained the heart of everything, ancient and wise, trusting and powerful. Ethan's mother had passed away peacefully 2 years prior, her final words expressing pride in what her son had become. His sister now worked as a senior researcher on the station, bonded to one of Phoenix's offspring. The family he'd wanted to support from a distance had become part of the greater family he'd found among the stars. On the anniversary of Spark's hatching, Ethan stood in the observation deck, where this had all begun. The dragon rested beside him, massive head on enormous paws, radiating contentment through their bond. Below them, the nursery held 23 eggs in various stages of development. The species that had teetered on extinction's edge now had a future bright with possibility. Spark made a questioning sound, and Ethan understood the dragon's curiosity. What did he think about, standing here, remembering the day a hatchling wouldn't stop following a janitor? Ethan said aloud, knowing Spark would feel the truth beneath his words. I think about how wrong I was about my life. I thought I knew what I wanted, a simple existence helping my family from a distance. I didn't know that sometimes the universe chooses you for something greater. And if you're smart, if you're brave enough, you let yourself be chosen. The dragon rumbled agreement, pressing closer to him. Through their bond, Ethan felt what Spark had felt that first day, the absolute certainty that this human was meant to be family. No doubt, no hesitation, just knowledge that transcended logic or explanation. The hatchling had known, and the hatchling had been right. Movement below caught Ethan's attention. One of the eggs was showing signs of hatching, hairline fractures spreading across its surface. He activated his communication device, alerting the conservation team, but didn't move from his position. Spark's attention focused on the egg as well, the dragon's parental instincts engaging. The egg split, and a small head emerged, this one jade green with eyes like emeralds. The hatchling struggled free, looked around the nursery with typical newborn confusion, and then did something that made Ethan's heart skip. It looked directly at the observation deck, at him and Spark, and chirped with recognition. Ethan laughed, the sound echoing in the observation area. Of course, another one choosing him, drawn by bonds that extended through Spark to include him in ways he still didn't fully understand. He said to his dragon, I think we're about to get busier. Spark made a sound that Ethan had learned to interpret as dragon laughter, and together they headed down to the nursery. There was a hatchling waiting, a new family member to welcome, and a bond to nurture. It was everything Ethan had never known he wanted, and everything he'd never give up. The jade green hatchling, who Ethan would later name Jade because sometimes simplicity was best, climbed onto his other shoulder when he entered the nursery. It balanced their opposite where Spark had once rested, and made the same contented sounds. 2 dragons now, bonded and trusting, both absolutely certain that this human was exactly where they belonged. Dr. Aldrin arrived, saw the situation, and just smiled. She'd long since stopped being surprised by these developments. She said, "Congratulations, Director Cole. You've been chosen again." Ethan felt the weight of two dragons on his shoulders, one memory and one present reality, both precious beyond measure. He thought about the janitor he'd been, the man who'd just wanted to push a mop and send credits home. That person seemed like someone from another lifetime, someone who'd existed before a hatchling decided to follow him and change everything. He said, "I wouldn't have it any other way." And that was the end of the story. If you listened all the way to here, don't forget to leave feedback about what you thought of the story in the comments, whether positive or negative. Your feedback helps us improve. Also, leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. And I'll leave here on the screen another video that I'm sure you'll like. Big hug, and see you in the next story.